This video is Chapter 8, Dimensioning and Notes. What you're going to need is you're going to need your U-bracket drawing. So I'm going to open that up. And before we begin, we're going to start by changing some of the formats to better match what the book has. So first I'm going to right-click on anywhere on the sheet, and I'm going to go to the Properties, and we're going to make sure that the scale is 1:1. It's a third angle projection, and we are using B ANSI landscape as our format. We only really care about sheet 2. We don't really care about sheet 1. In fact, we'll be deleting it later. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go Tools, Options, Document Properties, and make sure our drafting standard is ANSI. Once you have that, we can begin. We're going to start on page 821, and we're going to start with, after we just sort of move these in a little bit more appropriate spot, we're going to start by modeling the dimensions of this part and getting the feature dimensions in. So to do this, we're going to go to Annotation, and we're going to click Model Items. And going down, you can see that we can either source these dimensions for the entire model or the selected feature. We're going to do entire model. We can import them into all views. And I'm going to do marked for drawing. And I'm also going to do whole wizard profile. And the reason I'm going to do this is because when I created this part, I used the whole wizard for this. And if I don't select this, no dimensions will come up associated with that. The book does not have you include this because the book does not use whole wizard. We're going to hit OK, and we're going to see that some dimensions come up. And these dimensions may look similar to the book. They may look different. You can see that, while in mine, all of the dimensions that are in the book have come up. Some of them look a little different. Specifically, these radiuses look a little bit different. If for any reason yours looks different or a dimension does not come up, don't worry. I'll show you how to deal with that later on in this video. So the first thing, we can sort of just drag these dimensions around a little bit. We're going to drag this 2.5 over here, the 5 down and closer. And we're going to start changing some of the things like the leaders. So one thing I see is worth changing is, now we'd much rather have this look kind of like this, with a leader coming in and just the diameter 0.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this. I'm going to go to the Leaders tab. And you can see that right now Smart Leaders is checked, and it's chosen a linear aligned perpendicular to the axis dimension. We don't like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a radius, and we're going to do an open leader. And now we're going to select OK. And now you can see that just changed some stuff. Now it looks a little bit closer. Now the other thing is, now this sort of horizontal area, that seems a little long for our purposes. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into leaders, and we're not going to use the document bend length. We're going to shorten it a little bit, maybe 0.125 inches. If you're following this along in the book, I'm going to do things a little bit differently, but I am going to cover most of the material in the book. I may be using different values here or there, or changing different things. Ultimately, go through the book and go through this video. After doing both of those, you should have a reasonably good understanding of how to manipulate dimensions and notes in a SOLIDWORKS drawing file. So again, if you're having trouble following along in the book, just try to pay attention to what I'm doing. So the next up, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to modify this 0.25 dimension. We're going to try to do that same thing that we just did. We're just going to do a radius. And you can see that right now, if we go over here, this had this aligned, but this dimension is by default aligned, and we don't see that option. The reason for that is because it's from a hole wizard, so it treats it a little bit differently because the hole wizard is all aligned, and it's not a I mean, it is a radius, but it's not a direct radius, and that's how SOLIDWORKS works. So what we're going to do is we're just going to delete this, or I'm sorry, we're going to hide this dimension, and we're going to deal with that a little bit later. So next, what we're going to do is we're going to try to basically make this top view look like it does on page 825. So I'm going to drag this over here. Since we hid our my hole dimension, I'm just going to show you how to just bring in a new dimension. We're going to go to Annotation, Smart Dimension, select our circle, and there we have our missing dimension. Now you can, if you look closely, this is a little bit more black and this is more gray. The reason for that is because this is not a feature dimension. And what that means is, if I go in and change this 2.5, it's actually going to modify the part file in addition to the rest of the drawing because they're linked. This 0.25 is what's called a driven dimension. Therefore, if I try to change it, I won't be able to because it is linked with what the part is, and it's only a one-way link. It can't change the part. But we're going to leave that there. And to show you another example, we're going to add another dimension. It'll just be from this center to this center of 2.5. You can see it's also gray. And if you recall when we drew this, this hole was centered on our origin. And this hole was all based off of this 5-inch dimension and based on relations that made these two centered around this, which means if we tried to change this to be 0.25 and keep this at 5, we lose all those relations that we have in our drawing. Will become upset, and it'll cause a problem. That's why this is just a driven dimension, and you can't actually change it. So I'm pretty happy right now that this looks like it does at the bottom of page 825. So I'm going to continue moving on to this front view. So we can see that we've got these leaders right here. And again, I'm not exactly going to follow the book. I'm just going to sort of try my best to make it look like it does, say on page 829. That's going to be the final end result that we're looking for. So one thing I can see is this is a diameter. We didn't want it based off of a diameter, so we're going to use a radius. We don't want it to be an open leader. So what we're going to do is we're going to select inside, and we're going to select a solid leader inside. And we can see that now that's drawing from the inside. Pardon me. This one we actually wanted. We want it over here as a diameter. So we're going to go back, and rather than that inside, we're just going to do an outside, and that'll be that. You know, very easy. This one is the one that we wanted as a radius. So we go to leaders again, and we're going to click inside radius, and that's what we wanted. Apologies if you got a little bit confused there. So we want the 1.75 to be a radius dimension, the 2.5 to be a diameter dimension. We're also going to drag this 0.5 over here. And you can see that when I select this dimension, you can see these control points. These are the leaders. I can actually manipulate these leaders on an individual basis if I say wanted to separate this and have it separate from the drawing. This can be pretty tedious if you have a lot of dimensions, but if you have one dimension that's really giving you a lot of trouble and you don't want to go through the document properties and try to customize the document settings to be exactly what you want, you can sort of just click and drag them. Now the next thing that we have to do is we're looking for center marks. We need a center mark here and here, and then we also need center lines there and there. And the other thing that we have a problem is these lines right there. These lines, you look at them and you say, well, these lines are in between these holes. Maybe perhaps they're center lines. But actually what they are is they're the tangent edge. They represent the difference between this curved surface and this flat surface, this point you can see is that line. So what we're going to do is we don't want that visible. So we're going to right click the view, and you can see right here tangent edges, and we can do visible edges with the front view and no others, or just removed. So we're just going to remove them, and you can see that gets rid of those tangent edges. So moving on, we're gonna put some center marks and some center lines in. First one, we're just going to do a center mark. It's going to be here. We got a nice center mark, but that's not what we wanted. We don't want it to look quite this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to turn off the default extended lines. And we're going to just have the mark size is 0.1. The next thing what we want to do is we want to draw our own sort of customized extended lines. And the reason for this is probably because of this hole. This hole also, we'd like a center line through it, and we'd like, but we don't necessarily want an extended line to go through here. So to customize this, we're going to go into Sketch, and we're just going to select Line, and we're just going to draw these by hand. So you can see, just like we have our sketching tool, I'm just going to make sure this is in alignment. Now, it's worth noting that I am completely capable of dimensioning these lines and changing them so that they are certain distances from from the various features, and then hiding those dimensions. But because this is all based off of looks, I'm just going to sort of go by eye and say, you know what, that's close enough. Okay. So now we've got our center mark. The next thing we have to do is we have to add the center lines for these two holes. To do this, we're going to go back into annotation, and we're going to do center line. And it's going to ask you to select the conical edges or sketch segments of the center line. So we're just going to select this, and you can see that it was smart enough to automatically select these two lines. If it, for whatever reason, was not, what you may have to do is you may have to click one and then click the other. If you end up having to do it that way, a line should come up that completely bisects the space in between them. And we're okay with these center lines. They look pretty much like they do. So we're going to move on. So for those of you following along, we're on about page 830. And the next thing we're going to do is we want to play around with these center marks. And it wants to make these center marks much bigger. So what we're going to do is we're no longer going to use the document fonts. I'm just going to manually do this in this fashion. I think the book would like you to draw them or drag them. But I don't know if that's going to be quite necessary. So what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to increase the size of them. Till it's about there. So anyway, we're pretty happy with this part right now. So I'm just going to save this. This is wanting to update some other sheets. I've been working completely on sheet 2, not on sheet 1, and I'm just going to say yes, and we're going to rebuild and save the document. You may not get that error, so don't worry if you don't. The next thing we're going to be working on is editing the sheet format. But before we edit, we're just going to make our lives a little bit easier just by deleting this sheet 1 right now. We don't need it. We're only working on the sheet 2. So just to make it easier on ourselves, if you still have the sheet 1, we're just going to delete it now. So this is the only thing we're working on. The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to right-click Sheet 2 and edit the sheet format. Now what this does is it hides all of our views, and we can see that we can clearly edit all the stuff in there. So I'm going to zoom in so we can see what we're doing. The first and easiest thing we can do is we can modify some of these texts. So if I double click this or single click it, we can see that this is a note. And we can see that it's got format, fonts. This particular one has no leaders or borders. But let's say if we want to edit the content of this, we can just simply double click it and we can type what we want. So one thing we want to do is we want to get rid of the fractional, because there's no fractional dimensions here. And if you look on page 833, you can see that we want to do the angular machining tolerance is going to be 0.1 degrees. To add a degree, simply go to the text format and click Add Symbol and select degree very easily. We can get rid of some of these. We don't need the bend radius. There's no bends in this part. And the two-place decimal accuracy can be 0.01, three-place 0.003. And that'll look just like it does in the book. And if we choose to, we can drag this and then also drag all these lines as well, just to make it look a little bit neater. Moving along, we can add a new note, say for the material. So we can go up to annotation and note and say we don't want a leader. So if we go to no leader and we just select, well, we want it maybe right here, and we can say 1060 alloy. And if we want to change the font, this little formatting thing comes up and we can pretty easily change the font from there, which is useful and convenient. We can also go in to text format and say we exit out this. When we select the note, text format's also here, and we should be able to access the font in there. But so we've created our note, so we hit OK, and we can move it around as we see fit. So we've got our aluminum alloy. The next step, and this is something you may not have seen before, is we're going to look at property links. So if you look over here, you can see that this has come in as U-bracket. It's almost like SolidWorks knows that we're working on a U-bracket in this particular drawing. And that's because SolidWorks does. What SolidWorks has done is they've actually gone through and looked at what you've named the file, and that's where it's pulling this information. And the way you can see that is if you just come and hover over it, you can see that beneath your cursor comes up what the font is, if you may have changed the font, as well as this PRP SolidWorks file name. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to File, Save As. I'm going to change the file name, and I'm going to call it ENR 153. I'm going to add a description, and it's just going to be U bracket detail drawing. Or maybe just U bracket detail, like the book does. And if I save this, yours won't come up with that. But you can see that right here, this box updates. So what we can do is if we're creative, we can look around and there's a few other properties on this sheet that we can look at. So one thing, if we come up here and we just hold it up there, sometimes you got to wiggle it around, or sometimes you got to click it. You can see that there's a property called company name, and then there's a property called, it's not called middle left, it's called checked by. And then there's a sheet property over here. We could see a sheet property called description. And there's others various points. But I'm going to show you how we can get some of these. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into File, and we're going to go to Properties. And we can see that there's a few different properties associated with our file. We already have a description. That was from when we saved it. And we can just change this as we needed. But we're going to put a new property. We're going to have this called company name. And it's going to be a text. And we'll just call it MCC. And we'll type another one that's drawn by, and that's text, and it can be my name or your name. And we can see that what this has done is now we've brought something in here and we've brought something in here. Now this is clearly too large, so what we'll do now is we'll just change this font. So we'll double click it and just simply maybe bring the font down to a 16 or so, just so it can fit in. And this seems to be fit nicely. So you can see some of the power behind this property. If you had, if you use this format and you make sure to define these properties for each of your files, you don't have to worry about creating notes or creating this the box like creating the format from scratch every time. Now, one thing that's worth noticing is this format, this description format, doesn't seem to have come in, even though we do have a description property. And that's because, and you can tell, because it's a rather than the others, it actually has a PRP sheet, and it has that sheet. Now that means it's from whatever the part file that's in our drawing views. So if we open up our actual part file, we can look at this and we can go into File and we can go into Properties, and we can see that this has its own properties as well. So if we include and create a description, spelling and capitalization are very important with properties, otherwise it'll have difficulty finding them. And we say that this is a 2.5 inch U bracket, and we hit OK, and then we close and save this. We can see that 2.5 inch U bracket comes in. So that's because that was a property from our part file instead of our drawing file. But before we end, the last thing we're going to do, and we're going to pop back to Edit Sheet, we're going to show you that we can make changes to the part file from here and vice versa. So what we're going to do, now I think we've already seen that if we change the part file, this will update those changes. But what you may not have seen is this right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to be a 0.625. Now, one thing I noticed is this is a radius. It clearly shouldn't be. So we're going to make that a diameter. Now that that's a little bit better, now we're going to double click it and just do 0.625, and then double click this. Now you can see that this is automatically, it highlights these parts, because right now it's saying, hey, this is not rebuilt, you've modified this dimension. So right here I'm just gonna change this to be a 1.625. And now if we hit rebuild, now what that did is that actually went through the process, and now if we open up our part file will have changed to this. That's it for this video. Hopefully from this video you can create pretty detailed drawings